Well, thank you for joining us on the Harvest Podcast. My name is Ross Wallman. I'm the missions pastor here at Harmony Hill. I'm joined by Luke and Kate. As we said last time, not their actual names, names that we're using to protect their identities. And so if you don't know who they are, then you can talk to me and I can let you know, but for security's sake. But thank you for joining us for part 2 of our conversation. Let's jump back in. So you're prepared, you land in Myanmar day one. What does that look like starting out?
Well, you remember day one we get to the airport and there was a visa issue?
Yes.
You know, and so we're sitting on one side of immigration and the team who's waiting to meet us and greet us, they're sitting on the other side of immigration. And here we don't know any Myanmar language. And so we're all just trying to communicate across plexiglass, you know, what we need to do in this situation. And basically they just...
The guy runs off to go figure out the paperwork and he goes, just don't get on the plane.
Just don't get on the plane going back to America,
like,
he says.
Okay.
So we just sat there and just waited.
For a couple of hours, I think.
Yeah, and he came back with a little piece of paper with a stamp on it, and we don't know anything about what happened, but apparently the immigration official accepted that. We got pushed through and went in officially into Myanmar. And I think that's a microcosm of what the last 8 years has been, of just like,
stamps are key.
Stamps, man. Stamps are really important.
Okay.
But it was, I think that first 6 months, they talk about, I think the high when you first get to your place of service, you prepared for so long, whether it's 10 years or even a year, you know, however long it is that you've waited so long to get there and you've been planning, preparing, thinking, training, and you get there and just so excited for us and our kids, the 3 that were with us at that point, that just so excited. And everything was new. Everything was exciting. I think some of those people that we met those first 6 months, even like there's some of our dearest friends and in the culture, they've been helpful to train us up and to teach us. And they remember us when we were babies in the language and the culture.
Yeah. I do feel like when we first got there, our understanding was we're getting on the treadmill and pressing start. We didn't realize stepping on the treadmill that it was already going really fast. And there were days I think we fell flat on our face.
Yep.
You know, it was a very humbling experience, not knowing language, not knowing culture, and not realizing that there were multiple cultures within, you know, just even this small village and their modes of operation, what they eat, what they do every day, what time they wake up, what time they go to sleep, how they practice their individual religious faiths. Like all of it is different. And so there was a lot to learn. I remember in language, I mean, we did a barefoot language method, which was we drew, you know, we had a
we
set.
Didn't go to school.
Yeah, we didn't go sit in a class, but we hired a local girl from a shop, from one of the local shops, and said, hey, we'll pay you this much if you give us a couple hours of language. And she didn't know any English whatsoever. So we're miming half this. But the way it worked out is we had a list of 300 words that were the most commonly used words in a language. And so we went through the first 300 probably within a couple of months. And every day we're just drawing like on these little pieces, on these little note cards, man and woman and child and uncle and aunt, and learning all of these nouns and verbs and having her make recordings of them. And so every day we'd be done with language probably around noon or 1 o'clock. We'd go home and just listen to it 5, 6, 7 times, or usually until we just fell asleep because we were so tired. I mean, we had 3 kids and we were learning language. I mean, I think we were passing out every day at like 6 o'clock, you know, just because our brains were so stretched, so
and
thin.
Hungry. We would get out of language class and be like, I need to eat. I'm so hungry.
Starving. Yeah. Rice never tasted so good.
Yeah.
And your kids went right to sleep as well, right? And slept through the night and were doing great.
There were times where like, hey, here's some snacks and mommy and daddy are going to go. And we'd wake up and be like 10 o'clock at night, you know.
Doing who knows what.
And our kids like,
at that point, the first 6 months, we were living in a 1-room.
Oh my goodness.
It was a 2-room duplex, and there was another family on the other side of the wall. And so our family of 5 had 1 room with 1 squatty potty bathroom and a little sink that was the kitchen. And it was just a sink. There was nothing else. And so we had like mattresses all over the floor, and there's a pack and play. And then some locals that found out we were there, like kept trying to come over and visit. And I was like, I can't like host. There's nothing. Like I don't even have a table. There's no place to sit. Come to find out, that's how most of the most of them live. That they have one room for their families, and there'll be 3 generations in the same household. And so it was a sweet time. I'm really glad it was only the first 6 months because it was exciting. Everything was, you're like, it's fine. We finally made it. It's fine. There's a snake in the yard. It's fine. It would have not been fine the next year.
I could define the term squatty potty, but I'm going to let the people do that on their own.
Yeah.
Just Google squatty potty if you haven't used one or seen one. They are healthy.
Yeah.
And I've seen it on Shark Tank.
Yeah.
I mean, shameless plug for Shark Tank.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what I'm hearing you say is God clearly called 10 years of preparation. God preparing you even before those 10 years of preparation for the work that he would eventually have you to do. You land. It's not an easy landing.
Nope.
There's visa issues right off the way. Mistakes are made.
Yes.
So even with 10 years of prep, even with a clear calling of God, things don't go smoothly.
No.
In work, missions work. And so how do you get to a place where you can stay on the field even when it doesn't look like what you thought it was going to look like, even when you're making mistakes, but God is sovereign? There's a lot there, but how do you work through those things?
I think, especially for those first 3 years for us, our experience was a lot of things didn't work out how we wanted them to. I'd worked my entire life towards medicine, to get this degree, to get this certification, to be board certified. And then the first 3 years in Myanmar, we don't practice hardly any medicine outside of some like curbside consults here and there at people's homes, doing some blood pressure checks and things like that. But there is an identity crisis that occurs in that, is like, hey, am I defining my success by numbers, by salary? Am I defining, who I am based on what I do? Or am I defining my success based on, did I do what the Lord asked me to today? Did I glorify the Lord today? And am I a child of God? Am I forgiven? Am I loved? And am I indwelt by the Holy Spirit only because of what I do, or independent of that? Is he still the Lord? And there is a breaking down of a lot of things that I didn't realize, we didn't realize. We had kind of started to build our faith house on. There was not a faith crisis necessarily, but there was definitely, I know this is a hot word, I don't want to use it, but there was definitely some deconstructing of some things that we had built up, some ripping off of boards in our home.
Yeah.
But it was, I will say, it was to some degree, it was helpful to have a team, and they were going through their stuff and we were going through our stuff, and missionary biographies, they've been through stuff, like being able to normalize, hey, I'm really struggling with these things. Things are happening that are not measuring up to what my expectations were pre-field. Welcome to the club. Like it's just a part of, like even looking at Paul, in a lot of his letters, and the antics of a lot of the churches that he was writing letters back to, like, I'm sure that's not what he had planned, what he had thought the churches were going to look like. So even us struggling with that, like, we are joining a great cloud of witnesses in that struggle.
Yeah. I think for me, I just, coming from the West, coming from the South and America, there is a workspace culture that can pervade this area. And no matter how much you try to remove yourself from that, or teach your kids that's not the case, it's here, and we pick it up by osmosis, I guess. But so going through just that season of, I can't do anything without any help, and especially from America, we value being independent. We value, I can do it by myself. And so at those first couple years, I think my goal was I'm going to get to the point where I can do it by myself and I don't need, obviously right now I need my neighbors or I need my language nurturer or, teammates or whatever. And I think my goal was I'm going to be able to get to the point where I'm going to be so good at this, I'm going to be able to do it by myself. Why? Like I finally felt the Spirit being like, why is that your goal? That's not what I've called you to. That's not even what I've called any believers to. I've made you for a community. You are human, which means you have limitations and you cannot do all of this by yourself. You are not supposed to. So to think that you can, or to have that as your goal, that's prideful. For me, he's telling me this, that's prideful and that's not that's a waste of your time. And so to realize that, to wrestle with that and then recognize that and then confess that, I think that first year or two for me was a really big deal. And
that's right. Like depending on, here in the West, depending on others has become a shameful thing.
That's weak.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, But I mean, in the Lord's, in the kingdom, and in the church, there is a burden that is shared between people. And even realizing that pushing past that pride and setting aside that pride and letting our neighbors in our culture that we are living among know, hey, we really need help or we are dependent on you. There was a bond that was formed, that was forged in the midst of like, we're all that's left here and we can't make it without y'all's help. We really need help in this. And so having people who are believers, but also unbelievers in that culture come around us and form almost like a family. I mean, it takes a village,
They felt, even in that, like for me, I needed it, but for them, they needed it. This community is so poor, the community that we serve in, they're so poor that they view themselves as having no value for anybody else. They have nothing to offer. They have nothing to give. They can't do anything. But when the Lord brought us to the point of having to express our need, not only do we need help with language, not only do we need help, we don't understand what this stupid water pump does. Like, I don't know how to fix it. Like, there's no water. Just little things like that. Like, we needed the neighbor to come over. Well, he didn't even finish high school. Like, I think he finished third grade. But the fact that he felt like the doctor next door wants my help. The Lord was teaching us that's to offer them dignity and honor in those things. It was such a way to their heart that's what. Even that's what Jesus did. Like he allowed his disciples to be needed, to be like, we just learned so much through that season on how the Lord wants mission to be done. He didn't come down here and do everything himself yes, he saved all of us. Yes, he died for all of us, but he didn't just show up and it was a one-man show. Yeah. He allowed himself to need other people. He allowed himself to need, even Mary and Martha served him, and his disciples went out and did all this work for him. And he was showing us that, so why do we think that we need to go to a foreign country, or do we think we need to go across the street to do it by ourselves? Like, we need to allow ourselves to need other people. That's not weakness. That's it. Well, in our weakness, it's strength. It is a strength of the Lord. It's relationship. It's showing our humanity and showing our value for other people.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when we talk about, how do we know we are called to long-term missions? Well, I mean, ultimately through that humility and that neediness, if you will, those roots grew deep in that community, and a family formed for us, a family that we loved and we prayed for and that we shared with. I mean, they weren't all believers. And so there was, we just like we talk about when we leave, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and lands and homes, like the Lord does give those back to us. So when we leave for his name's sake, he does give those back to us. And he had given us that during our long-term service in Myanmar, for sure.
So, yeah, we could take, I'm sure, a long time to unpack 8 years overseas. But what I'm hearing you say is weakness, vulnerability with the people around you, vulnerability, I'm sure, with the advocacy team that you've had here. And even in your 8 years, that has changed a little bit over time, of people coming in and out of advocacy team. but being able to be vulnerable with them and give them ways that they can pray, staying connected to the local church. But what you also said there at the end is over time, God has brought believers and unbelievers into your life. You have formed a church there that is continuing to meet, even though you guys aren't there right now physically. So what does church then look like in Myanmar and where you were? What does it continue to look like today?
Yeah. Even I'll say just the foundational stuff from the get-go. When we started seeing disciples come to faith, our goal was to group them into a church. And at its very foundation, at its very core, in Acts 2:42 through 44, talks about what the first church looked like. Talked about that they met together regularly. They broke bread together, they prayed, and they sat in the apostles' teaching. So those are the 4 foundational aspects of a church that we wanted to form in our small village in Myanmar with these disciples. And so those are the 4 basic foundational principles that we said, that we laid out as, bullet points for our the beginning of our church. Organizations out there, they have things like church circles. They have, 12 aspects of a church, and there are a lot of different facets. But we stuck to those 4 foundations. Hey, we're going to have fellowship together and meet regularly. We're going to learn from the Bible. We're not learning from parabiblical,
Human perspective.
Yeah, human perspective. We're just going to open the Word and we're going to be in the Word. We're going to pray, and then we're going to take the Lord's Supper. We're going to eat regularly. We had we're going to have fellowship, yeah. But then what does that look like on a weekly basis? Honestly, our church, most of the people in our church, we see every day. It's not once a week. We have 2 formal get-togethers every week. One is a time of fasting and prayer every Wednesday, and on every Saturday morning we get together and we're going through the Word. And then we'll have another time once a month at least where we are having a party. We're either fasting all day Sunday and then breaking fast with the Lord's Supper, and then having a barbecue. Yeah, having a barbecue after that. I mean, it's just a big party. I mean, we have a slight conviction that of all the people in the world, the Lord's people should be able to throw the biggest and best and most awesome, joyful parties ever. So that's what that one Sunday a month looks like for our house church. Cool. And then there is other aspects. I mean, church discipline, accountability, that's hard. Accountability and church discipline are very hard. And we talk about sin. There's sin, and everyone sins, and there's always temptation. But then there's the practice of sin. And we've had several instances within our house church in Myanmar where we've had individuals who acknowledge outright, hey, the thing that they're doing and continuing to do and willingly choosing to do is a sin. And we've said, hey, we would love to help you with that sin. We would love to pray for you, intercede for you, be in the Word with you, keep you accountable, be with you all day, whatever it takes. Like, let us help you with that sin and walk you through that sin. And some of those people have chosen, yeah, let's do that. And some of those people have chosen, like, no, I know that this is a sin and I just want to do this, but I still want to be a part of your fellowship. And it hasn't gone, it hasn't gone well for our fellowship when we've even allowed that to be in for a little bit of time to continue. And so we've always said, like, hey, we all sin. But if you want to continue to practice a sin, you have to do this outside of our fellowship. And that church discipline, going from one-on-one, talking about the sin, to a group talking about the sin, to the church as a whole talking about the sin and addressing the sin, that is really hard to walk through.
Yeah. And those people who have chosen the sin and chosen to leave our fellowship, they've to date, every one of them turn around and try to shame us before the community, before the village, before the other lost people that are around there. And it is a very shame and honor culture. And so that's part of and they want to tell it first so that other people will take their side and not our side. And that's one of the things we've really had to work on with our fellowship is that we will not gossip. We will not talk about other people in a way that's going to tear them down. And so if that's not someone else's business, if they're not directly involved in it, we don't need to be talking about this, especially if it's outside of the fellowship. Obviously, if it's a person that's been practicing sin and they've chosen to leave the fellowship, it's reached that point, the whole house church knows about it. But we're not going to talk about it with neighbors or other people. And they can come ask us questions and we're going to answer honestly. But that's been very difficult. And especially, again, for me, like growing up in the South, my understanding was, well, if I do the right thing, then other Christians are going to be happy with me. And that's just not always the case. And so, but that motivation is incorrect. Am I doing the right thing so that people will be happy with me? Am I trying to gain the favor of man? Or am I trying to do the right thing to the best of my ability so that the Lord will be happy with me? And then living, understanding that I'm going to have to apologize. I'm going to have to confess. I'm going to have to fix things because I'm human and I'm going to mess up and I'm not going to understand everything. And so, it's been hard. We've learned a lot about that. And Luke always reminds me, is faithful to remind me that discipleship is messy. It's really messy. And as much as we want to think that God's going to intervene and make it all look nice and this is going to feel good, he chooses to let us wrestle with that. And I think that in the wrestling is when we find more truth about God, and we come to understand more about who He is.
And the last thing I'll say about the church is the house church seemed to stagnate when there was sin that was unconfessed and undealt with. I mean, there are times when there was sin and we just all threw it on the table. And there was a time of repentance, joyful repentance, coming together again, taking the Lord's Supper and just being like, yes, now let's go out. And can I say,
that is not a Myanmar culture. That is counterculture. That is not something they do. And we fought hard for that. We fought hard to teach that. We fought hard to do that. We had to we had to show it. We had to model it. And then now they're doing it. And that was 5 years in the making.
Yeah. So just throwing that sin out there, confessing and saying like, I know this is wrong, and just confessing to one another and then praying before the Lord, putting it before the Lord. When we started to see the house church growing and expanding, usually those were in times of persecution or times when people were the church or people who were around the church were going through, maybe unbelievers who were affiliated with some of our church members, they were going through something really hard. Maybe it was, a miscarriage, or maybe it was they were on hospice care. There was a time where a lot of things were happening that seemed just devastating from a human perspective. But the Lord was using that to soften the hearts of people, and we were seeing growth in the midst of a lot of trial and tribulation that really made us take a step back and say, like, yeah, the Lord is doing something despite our emotions and perceptions of all these negative happenings.
I think we got a glimpse of the Lord's value that He puts on suffering. He's showing us the brokenness of this world, and that we do need something else, and that something else is Him. But it's been through suffering that we've seen the most growth, I would say.
Yeah, that's good. So missions, hard. Discipleship, messy. Sometimes going on mission, planes fail. I don't want to leave people though with all the hard things of missions, although like we don't have to go far from scripture to see shipwrecks, and this is not a new thing. Right. We didn't have planes in Paul's days, but we did have vipers coming out of fires to bite him. So those are not new things. But what are some things where have you seen the Lord work over 8 years, over 18 years of since you've started preparing together to go? What are some things that you see God working in today in Myanmar and in your partners there too?
I'll talk first about our kids because it's easy to talk about missions and then just overlook that we have 4 children, 5 if you include a young girl who has basically lived with us and been part of our family for the last 3 years. It is not Kate and Luke going and serving overseas and the kids being drug along. It is an entire family's calling, and seeing the Lord purpose our children and even bring people to faith through our children's witness is evidence that he is at work out there, but he's also at work in here, like in our household. And seeing our children live their faith out in multiple cultural contexts, whether it be East Texas or Myanmar or other places when we go in the United States, just seeing them bear witness about the great things that they even see. I mean, they're not just mimicking what their parents say. They are of their own volition and in their own words and thought processes, bragging on what the Lord has done in their lives. And we're thankful and honored that all 4 of our children have come to faith, and 3 of them were baptized in Myanmar, and we might take the 4th one back, just so he's not the odd man out. But he is the Lord is using our children just like he's using us to bring people to faith and glorify his name.
Awesome. That's good. What about the state of the church of believers in Myanmar? What does that look like today? Maybe in your little pocket where you are now, and if you have a picture of what it looks like in the country as a whole, what does that look like?
So Myanmar has it is 135 people groups is on the demographics, and 3 of them claim to be 99% Christian. Most of them do not live in our area. They live in their own state and other parts of the country. But the few that we do see from those people groups, they claim that since their people group is almost 100% Christian, then their job is done. And they have no need to go, because we ask them, well, how are you sharing your faith? How are you talking about Jesus with others? How are you sharing with your neighbors? Like, oh, our job is done. Our people group is covered. So they don't think that they have any responsibility to the other people groups. There's a very much of, not nationalism, but like they're all, like they focus on their own people group and no one else matters to them in this area in Myanmar. And so those 3 people groups have become very nominal in their faith. It's become this mindset of, well, my grandmother was a Christian, so my mom's a Christian, so I'm a Christian. But when you ask them questions or ask them about their faith or how they're being obedient to Christ, they really don't have an answer. Most of them. There are some very sweet, very genuine believers in Myanmar, and we love hanging out with them and getting to do fellowship with them. But for the most part, it's very nominal among those areas, and so that reflects itself in the churches that are there. The institutionalized churches that are in Myanmar tend to be very inward focused. It's more of a Christian hangout than a place where believers go to be equipped to go out and to share the love of Christ. And so we, for a long time, tried to work with some of the other local institutionalized churches, try to do it just through, do mission work through them instead of trying to do anything outside of that. And the response from those churches was that good news sharing is not the job of a lay person, that if you're not a pastor, if you don't have a seminary degree, then you're not allowed to do that. It's not legal for you to do that. And so because of those responses, and we remain in relationship with them, but that's a very different mindset than we have, and that's not something we could agree with. And so we bless them, and then which is why we ended up doing a house church separately with the believers that had already come out of a Buddhist background faith into a Christian faith, into believing in Jesus. And so that's still very hard. That is actually, from those local institutionalized churches, is the largest source of persecution that the house church that we have seen start there, those are the people that are persecuting them the most. And again, they're coming at them with, well, you're not a pastor, you don't have a seminary degree, so it's not legal for you to go share your faith. You need to let the pastor do it. And so they're threatening them with prison time and with turning them in and all these different things and keeping them from different fellowship or community activities because they're not obeying the laws that a man has set up for them in that community. But the neat thing that we have seen is when you can show a difference between that nominal Christian faith, which can be filled with a lot of legalism and a lot of just a lot of things that, Father's not proud of. And you can also compare that, not compare. When you can show the contrast of that, when we can live out our faith as sons and daughters of God who love like he told us to, speak truth, who can provide compassion to the community, they see the difference. People see the difference, and they're attracted to that kind of compassion. They don't see that in their Buddhist communities. They don't see that in this nominal Christian community. But when the love of Christ truly is put on display, especially in a place where it's just void of it, it's a love vacuum. Then a lot of people want to come and hear about that.
Yeah. So people ask us, how can we pray for Myanmar? Like, especially, and they're surprised when we say, I think we need to pray for the church in Myanmar. One, they're surprised there's a church in Myanmar. And yeah, there's a church in a very large convention with, a lot of even Baptists. Maybe we wouldn't consider them to be Baptists here, but people who, at least by name, follow some type of Baptist teaching. And so when we talk about praying for the church in Myanmar, when we talk about when it's obstacles to the good news, we think about political systems, militaries, laws, religious factions, whatever it may be. You don't really think of the church as being a barrier. It can be, especially when there's a lot of extra biblical manifestations within the church, extra biblical practices within the church. So I think we have things we can learn about, and I don't presume to know all the answers as to how to help the church, but I know that we can pray for the church of Myanmar and pray for true revival, a breakdown of those extra biblical practices, and a empowerment of the lay person's witness. I think that would be huge. Just being able to think that all the lay people who have something to share. Any of you listeners know, like, if your pastor said, hey, you shouldn't be sharing the good news, that's my job. America, we are rooted in grassroots movements. We want the lay person's witness. Like, that's a very important thing. So that's something that I think we can pray for Myanmar, is just, the average everyday Joes in the welding shops and the car shops and the tire shops, and the wood shops and the market, those people to be able to share, the Lydias, like we see in Acts, like the Lydias, to just be able to
be empowered.
And be empowered.
Yeah. And you remind me all the time that she's still the bride.
The
church is still the bride.
The church is still
and
the bride.
So even if she looks messy and she's, filled with a lot of legalism or just, false teaching, that she's still the bride, and the Lord still very much loves her and values her, and that he will redeem her, and he will not let this stand. He will provide repentance. And so and we want to be a loving reminder, not a group who's at war with them, but a loving reminder of what we are called to be. And so, I think for our church, for us in Myanmar, as we have relationships with the church there, and the church members there, and then all of us in the South in America, where maybe we hear Christians that are saying things or doing things that are not Christ-like, it is our reminder that they're still part of the bride, and we're called to love them.
Yeah. So there are still some believers that are meeting in your church there. I know as a church we got to pray for some of those. What are some encouraging things that we can know as a church of praying for them? I think of Mr. B and Miss G. Did I get that right?
Yes.
The letters with the Mr. and the Mrs. And their calling to go, and I know that hasn't been easy. There's family members who are telling them, hey, don't do these things.
Yes.
So maybe share some stories really stick with people,
Yes.
and names, although we can't share specific names of believers, but can you share a little bit about that house church that y'all started and some of the things the Lord is doing through them, even though you guys aren't there giving leadership, they're soldiering on for the gospel.
I think I'll start with the house church leaders, the Priscilla and Aquila. I don't know if we want to include their names on there or not. Priscilla and Aquila. They both came. So the wife, Priscilla, came out of a Buddhist background, or she was a Buddhist, and she became a believer, I think it's been about 6 years ago. And then her husband was one of those Christian people groups who didn't actually have a relationship with Christ, but didn't realize it until his Buddhist wife became a believer and started being more loving than he was, who was supposed to be a follower of Jesus. And so they believed about, I think, 5 and 6 years ago. And man, again, like discipleship is messy. They've like just seeing them grow over the past few years. And I recently had the honor to look at Aquila and just tell him that when I met him, he was a boy. He acted like a boy. He thought like a boy. He did all these things, like just immature, and to see him grow into a man of God, and that I respect him so much, just his maturity and his boldness, and how he is, before he would just kind of sit back and let Priscilla do whatever she wants, or let they have a son, Caleb, just do whatever he wants, and he really wouldn't intervene, and he'd be really passive, and now he's standing up for what the word says. And he said, no, we're not going to engage in gossip. No, we're not going to, just let our son go and do the things that the neighborhood Buddhist kids do. We're going to be different. And so seeing just his leadership in the home has changed. His leadership of his wife has changed. And in Myanmar culture, the women have a lot of authority, and the men kind of submit to them in a lot of ways, especially with money and with business and things like that. And to see him really desire to step up and to have leadership in that, not domineering at all, but no, I'm going to take care of you, has just been a joy to see his maturity. And then for Priscilla to come, she really struggles with just anxiety and with fearing all these things that could happen. And especially now that they have a son, and now they have another child on the way, just fearing a lot of things and trying to make sure everything's always okay. And to see her go from just being anxious and sometimes borderline hysterical to now taking everything to the Lord in prayer, taking every thought captive, not engaging in the hysterics, I guess, of the neighbors, the women that are around, and not engaging in the gossip that's around. Again, just seeing her maturity and growing up and desiring to be a godly wife and mom. And I think something that one way we can really see that is in Myanmar, there's just not a lot of love between spouses even. It kind of was more of a business arrangement that is help you, help me, okay. And to see them in the past couple years learn how to show affection in a very godly way and to value each other in a very loving way has really been neat to see them think about each other and honor each other in public, and which is just very unusual for that area. So for me, just even more than, when they said they believed, I rejoice. When they got baptized, I rejoice. But seeing them persevere in persecution and now grow in maturity and sacrificing to lead others to grow in maturity has just been a delight.
Yeah, and leading others, they're talking about, they're looking at us and saying, was discipleship this messy with us? And we're like, oh yeah. And so they're starting, they're understanding that it's not point A to point B in a beeline. Like it's very difficult walking people through life circumstances. And so Mr. B and Miss G specifically, we went to their wedding a couple of years back. And it was, again, two different people groups. Miss G is from a smaller people group, unreached. Mr. B is from one of those three main, largely Christian people groups. But both of them were completely lost, and he was mixed up in drugs and alcohol and all this stuff, beating her, and she was beating him, I think, not just verbally but physically, and so it was
Not unusual.
it was just a really rough marriage, obviously with no foundation, no biblical foundation in it. But they started coming to some of our house church times and studying the word with us. And then soon after that, she got pregnant and she had severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure went up. She had a lot of swelling, and she ended up having a miscarriage during that pregnancy. And their response immediately was to walk away from the church and walk away from anything to do with the Lord. And we didn't hear very much from them. We heard some things peripherally about where they were, what they were doing, but they were just kind of in the wind, spiritually and physically. We didn't even know. But within the past year, they have come back around, and Priscilla and Aquila specifically have just reached out to them and gone and shared with them, prayed with them, and Ms. G became pregnant again within the last year. And so they were studying with us, studying with Priscilla and Aquila, and part of the house church. And they decided that they wanted to follow Christ, which we rejoiced in, And then one week they decided, hey, on Sunday, this coming Sunday, we would like to be baptized. We would like Priscilla and Aquila to baptize us. And so, man, we were so excited about that. A couple of days before that baptism, and this is all within a week, a couple days before that baptism, she started having pregnancy complications again. She was about 30 weeks into her pregnancy, about to go into in the third trimester. And she went into premature labor and delivered what looked like a 38-week-old baby who had a lot of trouble breathing. And ultimately, about a week later, the whole house church went with them to a city about an hour away to a hospital, and that baby ended up passing away. And that entire time, the whole house church came around Mr. B and Miss G. I mean, they studied through Job. They were praying together. They were even worshiping together, just praising God together. Even in their pain. And so here we are thinking like, man, they've been through it again. Last time they walked away. This time they're gone. Like, how is God going to recover this situation? And the next week, Mr. B and Miss G were like, no, we still believe in him. We have tasted and seen that he is good. We know his comfort, and we know his love and the depth of it, even to reach us in the midst of our pain in this situation. And so they still were baptized even that next week. And so while we rejoiced in their baptism, we exponentially rejoiced in the fact that they went through that difficult time and their faith was fortified despite those trials and tribulations. And so they are now, Mr. B and Miss G. We talk about, what are signs of a healthy church? And one of the signs of a healthy church is sending missionaries, sending people out to reach the lost, either in their communities or abroad. And so our house church of less than 10 people, in Myanmar has sent Mr. B and Miss G out to the villages who feel called to go and to share the good news among unreached in remoter places of Myanmar. And so that is now what they're doing.
That's really cool. Well, I think we have a lot of material there that we can we'll probably make this a 2-part, actually probably going to make this 2 parts, and I think it'll be good. But yeah, thank you guys for sitting back. How can we as a church, and maybe this even goes beyond Harmony Hill, that's my prayer, obviously, how can we be praying for you guys? Obviously as a church, we're going to be praying for you guys in this new chapter. And we'll be exploring that in the weeks and months to come of what that looks like, to explore in the specifics of that. But how can we be praying for you guys as a family, and for your church in Myanmar? What prayer requests can we lift up for people who are listening?
I think definitely pray for the house church. It's in Myanmar. They are continue to experience significant persecution, and a lot of it is from the local institutionalized church that we mentioned. Pray that they will be filled with boldness and a love for others, and that it won't be just, oh, I love them, but it'll be an outflowing love, and that they will even, I am praying, and this is hard for them, but that they will look for ways and find ways to even be able to love on that church that is mistreating them so badly. That they will also be confident in who they know they are, that who the Lord has made them, that they are not wronging the Lord. They are not sinning and going against what this pastor says or that pastor says, that if they're obeying what the Lord says, it doesn't matter what can man bring against you if the Lord is for you. And that they will look for ways to be bold, but not confrontational about that. Do that in a loving way. And then for us, and I'll let you share also, but for us, we are still grieve to some extent that we cannot return home to Myanmar immediately. We do believe that will be sometime in the future, but future when? 10 years, 1 year, 20 years? I don't know. But we do believe as a family, and several of our kids have voiced this as well, that the Lord has something he wants us to do in Thailand as we go, and that this is not just, oh, we're just waiting around or we're just taking vacation, that there's something specific he's calling us to, and that he's already there doing it, and he's given us a choice to come and join him in this, and that we will be able to be just as excited about doing that work with him in Thailand, even though it's not home, as we were just as excited about doing this with him in Thailand as we were about doing the work in Myanmar, which again, we still feel is home. Myanmar's our home. But that just the Lord, he knows how to get us to where he wants us. He knows who needs help. He knows who needs his love. And I mean, to be honest, like, he knows who's going to obey him and he's going to go do it. And we're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to mess it up and we're going to have to apologize and fix it. And then we're going to be able to learn to do it a better way. But that we will trust him as we move forward, that he's going to give us everything that we need to do his works that he's already called us to do. He's already prepared for us beforehand.
I think my one thing is just praying. It's easy for us to feel like we are not on the front lines right now. We forget that, I mean, all of you listeners out there just joining us in prayer, we are all standing shoulder to shoulder in this war. We are all on the front lines, standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer, engaging the enemy, praying without second guessing, without double-mindedness, without doubt, knowing that the Lord is going to answer, and knowing, honestly, that the victory is already won. So just pray that we would, I mean, the enemy wants, I think, us to feel like, hey, we're second best, back of the line, back of the bus, whatever, get back there, you're unworthy. And just help us to pray against those feelings that the deceiver would plant in us.
Yeah, that's good. There's a lot there, and I think there could be a lot more places to dig in, but thank you guys for sitting down, for talking. Thank you, Luke and Kate, for talking to me. This has been an episode of our Harvest podcast. If you find this helpful, or even if you don't find it helpful, if you could like it, share it across social media, if you could tell people by word of mouth so that people know about it, it's really helpful for people who are thinking about missions, for people like Luke who don't know that God's preparing them to go, for people who are preparing for short term or thinking through calling. All of these are helpful, and you can help us to get this into the ears of the people who need to hear it by liking and subscribing to this podcast. So thank you for listening. We hope this has been helpful, and we hope that you will take what you've heard and continue to pray for the work happening throughout the world, but especially in Myanmar, and for Luke and Kate and their kiddos as they prepare for the next chapter of what God has already prepared beforehand for you to walk in it. So thank you for listening, and have a great day.